we find between 10 and 30% of all residents are misclassified. And we find an average that they are underfunded to the tune of about $12,000 a year. That's just an average number. If you had a facility of, let's say, 50 residents, and let's say 20% are misclassified, that's 10, and you're looking at $12,000 per resident, that's $120,000 a year. That can make a big difference to the financial performance of an aged care facility.
Just out of the box, I'm quite interested in how you found yourself in the aged care space.
So my background is actually in financial services. I've worked in a number of different countries. I've worked in South Africa, as you can get from my accent, the UK, Hong Kong, and Australia. And I was mostly in financial services. I've worked for a few banks. I've had CEO and COO, Chief Operating Officer roles. The last 10, 15 years with Wesfarmers, and then in their insurance division. And then I moved into insurance and insurance broking. So my background is actually completely not aged care. But in 2020, I left my role at my previous employer, which is a big insurance broker. And I had the luxury of deciding what I wanted to do next. And I thought to myself, there was an opportunity to invest in a business that provided physiotherapy services into aged care. I got involved in that, didn't buy that business, but that kind of really piqued my interest in the industry. What really attracts me to aged care is the fact that it's a role that is providing a real benefit to a community or to a sector of our society that is vulnerable. So for me, it's a noble industry. I don't want to overstate the word noble, but that's kind of how I feel, certainly compared to what I was doing before in financial services. So, I get a lot of joy out of being able to add value to our clients that are residential aged care providers who are providing the best care they can to their residents. And I'm passionate about Switch being able to help our providers deliver the best care to their residents.
So you must bring a lot of new skills that you're probably finding are not so easily found in the aged care space.
Well, I think one of the advantages, my business partner, Alex Becerra, he's a physiotherapist. So we have a good combination of skills. I bring in obviously certain financial and operational disciplines. I emphasize the need to show our clients the effectiveness of what we're doing, because people are paying money for our services. They want to see that it's actually effective. And that really comes from my background in financial services, where there's a lot more rigor around how you report the data you provide, and there's transparency around the service that you give people. So that's something I've brought into the business. And then also a massive focus on customer service. A lot of my roles in the corporate sector and financial services was around customer service, around client interactions. So I really appreciate the need not only to provide a good customer experience, but also to understand their needs and try and come up with solutions that meet those needs, whether they are their resident needs or also their financial needs. A lot of the time in aged care, as we know, people are strapped for money. A lot of financial providers aren't making profits. So how do we flex our services that meets their budget requirements?
So you'd be able to bring different methodologies to apply as well, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, a lot of my career, I've lived in different countries, as I told you. I've actually worked in different sectors. So financial services, yes, but within financial services, I've run a few different types of businesses. Before that, I worked in professional services, and then I've also worked in a trading company that sells pulp and paper around the world. So what that does, it allows me to be pretty adaptable. And the common thread is understanding what are the needs in a particular with your clients, and how do you then take what you deliver, what you offer, and deliver that in a way that's cost effective and best meets those needs. And you can apply those kind of principles to many industries, including aged care.
I'd even imagine, Jurgen, with your background, the ever-growing need for data and paperwork and compliance issues, etc., in the financial and the background that you have, that would stand you in pretty good stead dealing with all of that.
Absolutely, Danny. I think data is more and more becoming a really important issue. Managing, being able to collect data and then understand what that data is telling you. So there's also discipline around how you actually collect the data and how you classify it and record it, and then getting insights into what that data is telling you. So a lot of industries, including financial services, they invest millions in data collection and reporting and analysis. But yes, I certainly appreciate that. And it's something that what I've seen so far, not so much on the provider side because they've got information, but certainly from the physiotherapy, we also provide training and consulting services. Having data around, for example, around falls, which is a key risk within an aged care facility, that's something we developed quite a sophisticated tool on that, which helps us identify the causes of falls and then also examine different techniques for improving or reducing the frequency of falls, and then applying those techniques into other aged care providers. And that does come from getting good data.
I often think about the clinical implications in residential aged care and how many things that we might accept as we say they're part of aging and say there's no way to improve or, to improve falls rates and things like that. But what type of, strengthening exercises and things that people might not do as they age that can reduce, give them more strength, give them more stability, more balance, and can reduce. Is that the type of things that you're discussing there?
Absolutely. So we as you know, before the new AN-ACC system came into place, a lot of the physiotherapy treatments were really around pain management, which essentially was massage, right? It wasn't a lot. Of course, there was some rehab work, but the incentive of that system was for physiotherapists to provide pain management. We were lucky. We worked with the provider before the introduction of AN-ACC. It was very progressive. They saw the value that physiotherapy brought to improving their residents' quality of life. And we developed a modular physiotherapy program called Vitality Care. It provides not only the reactive treatments like pain management, but also more preventative programs that improve mobility and independence. And then the beauty of Vitality Care is that it's got different components, and we can dial those components up or down depending on the health and lifestyle goals of the residents, but at the same time fit within the provider's adult health budget. So you talked earlier about mobility and independence. Quite a chunk. We provide reports every month to our clients around where we spend our time with the physiotherapy treatments. And roughly about 35-40% of our time is spent around one-on-one exercises and group exercise classes that are purely focused on restoring functional movement, improving mobility, strength, balance, all of which helps independence, reduces the risks of falls. So there's a much more of an emphasis now on preventative. As you say, eventually we all deteriorate, but there's a lot that can be done to delay the onset of frailty and keep people independent for longer so they can continue to enjoy the activities that they have always participated in.
I just noticed that you have an emphasis on the regions. What do you think are the challenges there as opposed to the city-based facilities?
I think we all agree that the biggest challenge everyone talks about, the biggest challenge facing the AHP industry is staffing, finding staff. But financial sustainability is another big challenge. Like in 2022, I think it was only a third of aged care providers reported a profit. Now, those problems are exacerbated in regionally located providers. They lack, often those regional areas, they lack the amenities and the services to attract staff. Or if they do attract them, they struggle to retain them. And the fact that a lot of these regional providers are small and subscale also impacts their financial performance. So we saw a gap there in terms of servicing that sector. We've developed an affordable virtual physiotherapy program. It's based on our Vitality Care. But what it does is it complements the existing on-site visits. A lot of providers do have a physio who comes on-site, irregularly because of distances often. So our virtual physiotherapy program delivers certain, if you like, interventions virtually. So there's certain things you can do virtually, like, for example, assessments, staff training. You can do the one-on-one exercise classes. You can do group exercise classes. You could do falls reviews all remotely. So what that does then, it frees up the visiting physiotherapist to focus on manual therapy. The benefits to the residents is they're getting a more regular physiotherapy program that's not just reactive, but it's also preventive. And the provider benefits because they're getting a much better return on their physiotherapy investment.
There must be some kind of other benefits coming from that, I would think, Jurgen, because I know from me going and working out in the gym, there's like social and connection to people, and it's not just the strengthening and the physical. It's like there's all these amazing relationships I make. And do you see that type of thing happening as well?
That's an excellent point. Yes, that's exactly right. So especially with the group exercise classes, Adam, we do encourage that as much as possible, because first of all, it's obviously more cost effective. There's more people involved, supervised by one person. But importantly, it provides that social connection. As you know, isolation is a big issue, and you can be isolated in an aged care facility if you're stuck in your room. But having that interaction with other people, that encourages, that provides a bit more of a fun environment. Sometimes we get a bit of competition going as well. We have a wellness Olympics we run for certain of our clients, where there's a little bit of a competitive element. But all of that's designed to make things more fun and stimulate that social connection. And that's really important for aging. In fact, it's important for all our well-being, having that social connection.
Yeah, that's cool. I can imagine competing as when I'm older, competing in some type of
That's a great
Olympics. Yeah, I'll be against you, Danny.
Yeah, I'll be roundly trounced. I think.
That's hilarious.
With the remote stuff, the remote aspect, Jurgen, was that escalated during the coronavirus? The need for that?
Actually, to be honest, Danny, we only developed that probably in the last 6-7 months. So the business, we struggled during during COVID getting staff. What we find is a lot of staff who want to work with the elderly and who want to work in remote areas. And we do target people who not just have the clinical skills, but also have the passion to working with the elderly and want to work in a remote or regional location. Because the residents build up a rapport with their carers. What we don't want is a situation where somebody comes there 6 months later, they don't really want to work in the remote location, they go back to the city. What we find is that when we actually recruit or we advertise for jobs in regional locations, we find like 90%, at least 90% of people are overseas trained. So, so that means that you're generally going to get somebody who is going to be either living here on a student visa or maybe has been working here before in another age care facility, but invariably, and you get a lot of people from overseas who apply for these roles. So we do focus very much on getting people who are going to stay in a regional location, so we provide that continuity. But it doesn't invariably mean that we're having to recruit overseas candidates. Sometimes local, but trained overseas. When I say local, they're based here, but trained overseas.
That's a high number.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a solid 90%.
Wow. So do they need retraining when they come here?
Well, there's certain registration requirements. So certain countries are exempt from that. Places like the UK, Canada, the US, Hong Kong, in fact, and a few others. But we see a lot of applicants from India, from the Philippines, sometimes from the Middle East. None of them, no matter how experienced they are, none of them are able to get general registration when they come out here. They have to go through a limited registration process. And sometimes it's quite ironic because sometimes they have to be supervised by somebody who is less experienced by far to what they are.
Wow.
And I understand there has to be certain controls because, you don't know how people have been trained. But in our experience, we have had some excellent physiotherapists from other countries, really good, with extensive knowledge of clinical knowledge, extensive experience in aged care. Yet, because of the rules, they have to be under supervision for a period of time. So yes, there is a cost to the business because we have to provide that supervision, but that's just the cost of doing business.
When you're engaging with the providers in this way. Is there some type of skill transfer or knowledge transfer to the staff of the provider?
Not in physiotherapy. So in recent years, well, I would say maybe I should say the recent 8-9 months, we focused on where else can we add value in the aged care sector, not just physiotherapy. We developed expertise around AN-ACC. I could talk about that later if you like, but we've also gone beyond that. We see a gap in the market with training, staff training, not our staff. Obviously, with our staff, we want to train them and make sure they continually improve their skills, but also this training with our provider client staff. There are a lot of training courses out there. A lot of the courses are very content heavy. They don't help the staff who are on the course learn how to apply that knowledge in a real world setting in their work environment. So we've teamed up with, we saw an opportunity. We've teamed up with QPS benchmarking. We've also teamed up with Diver1fy, which is a innovative online educator. And we've developed some training courses that provide a far more immersive learning experience than what's currently on the market. We call it experiential learning, where we provide scenarios, case studies, knowledge checks. And what that does is, obviously there's content behind it, but what it does is it helps engage the staff who are on the course, and it helps them learn how to apply that knowledge day to day in their jobs. And that's the most important thing. At the end of the day, you want people to come out of that, number one, retaining the knowledge, and number two, be able to apply it in a real world setting.
It's really not useful to have knowledge if you can't apply it.
Correct. And often courses they're content heavy. And the reality is that there's a limit to how much you can absorb and retain. You do a course today, 2 days later, you've lost about 80 or 75 or 80%. I can't remember the stats, but a high percentage you've lost. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is often these courses are too theoretical. They're too disconnected from the real world that you live in and operate in. So our courses are designed not only to apply the knowledge, but also to promote problem solving, promote critical thinking as well, and help retain the knowledge.
You mentioned there that you one of the things you look at is AN-ACC. Jurgen, tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Yeah, so we've developed an expertise on AN-ACC. We've worked with another company that spent a lot of time understanding AN-ACC and developed a bunch of tools and processes around how to review residents, how to screen them, if you like, to identify which of those residents are not classified correctly, then how to do the assessments in line with the AN-ACC classification protocols, and then how to update the documentation. And all of that's important because when the external assessor comes in, they typically obviously observe the resident, they talk to the care staff, but they also look at the documentation that's on the clinical system to decide where the resident should be classified. So it's really important that with residents' condition changing all the time, the care needs are changing, the cost of delivering that care is changing. You want to make sure that the funding that you receive stays in line with the cost of care that you are delivering. And we find with our clients, between 10 and 30% of residents are not receiving funding in line with their care needs. So that's a real problem. And a lot of them, they've got potentially AN-ACC coordinators. There's quite a comprehensive area, if you like, of information, of knowledge. So getting your head around all the nuances around assessments and documentation to bring it, if you like, in line with the AN-ACC classification protocols is not that easy. But we have developed substantial expertise in doing that. So the goal of we call it our AN-ACC optimization service, and the goal is really twofold. First, we ensure that all the residents in a particular facility are correctly classified and funded under AN-ACC. And then secondly, which is quite an important point, is that our objective is to make our clients self-sufficient in managing AN-ACC. So we provide the AN-ACC optimization essentially provides on-the-job training, so the staff then become experts themselves at assessing and documenting the residents, so that their funding always keeps pace with the cost of care delivered. We find, as I said, on average, we find between 10 and 30% of all residents are misclassified, and we find average that they are underfunded to the tune of about $12,000 a year. That's just an average number.
Is that each resident?
Well, the ones that are misclassified.
Right.
So if you had a facility of, let's say, 50 residents, and let's say 20% are misclassified, that's 10. And you're looking at $12,000 per resident, that's $120,000 a year. That can make a big difference to the financial performance of an aged care facility.
Yeah,
especially today with the way the economy is performing.
So would you say that reclassification would be the main kind of maybe mistake might not be the word, but the main issue that you're seeing with AN-ACC? Are there other issues you're seeing out there at the moment?
AN-ACC's obviously got a number of obligations associated with it. One of the big issues, and I've talked about the staff problem earlier. One of the big issues is that with AN-ACC, you've got to provide a certain amount of care minutes and RN minutes for each AN-ACC class. An average that they talk about 200 minutes per resident per day, that's an average. Each AN-ACC class has a different target, and your targets are set every quarter, and you've got to deliver those targets. It's mandatory to deliver against those targets. So let's say your case mix in a particular facility is like 194 care minutes per resident. You need to hit that. Now, if you've got a shortage of care staff, that becomes problematic. But there's certain things there's a bunch of techniques that you can adopt to help alleviate that problem. But it is a problem. It really is a problem, especially with the registered nurses. And it's in our experience, it's more of a problem in the regional areas, because once again, it is not always that easy to attract staff out there. So that's, I would say, apart from the funding, the actual care minute obligations is a big issue.
So that could put some providers in quite a pickle, couldn't it? Because you might be taking on higher care residents or uplifting funding for certain residents, but then having troubles fulfilling your care minute requirements, right?
That's an excellent point. So there's sometimes in our AN-ACC optimization service, we do spend time doing an analysis of the trade-off between the extra funding you're going to get versus the extra care minutes that you need to deliver. And then sometimes you might have to not apply for reclassification for certain residents, where the financial impact is not going to be that big, but the care minute impact is going to tip you over the edge. But there's a trade-off there. We know how to manage that trade-off. But yes, there's definitely, but then you're caught between a rock and a hard place. Generally, you're delivering a certain amount of care to your residents, and it's going to cost you a certain amount of money. But if your funding's down here, that's problematic. Your cost of care is there, your funding's there. So you need to lift your funding at least to that. And yes, there might be more care minutes involved, but then there are steps you can take. And if you're showing the commissioner that you actually are trying to recruit and you are taking active steps, and there's certain things you can do on the roster as well that can help alleviate it. Even something small like assessments that the care staff do, those don't get classified as direct care. So you can outsource that. So I talked about our remote physiotherapy program, which we can do certain assessments remotely. So then that means that staff can then focus on direct care. That helps increase their contribution towards the care minute target. So there are a few things you can take.
So there's smarter ways to operate inside that system.
Yes. But we've done quite a bit of training on AN-ACC. We have one of the online training courses we developed with QPS and Diver1fy is an AN-ACC navigator course that dives into a lot of detail around how to do the assessments, how to do the documentation. What do they look for when I say they? What does the assessor look for when it comes to cognition, compounding factors, mobility? What are the things you should document? Like resident progress notes are important. Obviously, the care plans have to be in sync with the progress notes and the assessment notes. So all of that gets covered in detail in our AN-ACC Navigator course. But we also presented last year to a lot of clients our AN-ACC Fundamentals course, which is really an overview of AN-ACC, the whole system. And it was interesting because even as late as last year, October, November, I was quite surprised by the lack of knowledge of AN-ACC with a lot of the care staff and also obviously management. They had a pretty okay idea, but a lot of the nuances of AN-ACC had no idea. So, people are busy. Running an aged care facility is not a trivial issue. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's staff, there's residents, there's families. Their care needs are high. It's very difficult to find time to get your head around a lot of these things. I'm a big believer in really trimming down content to provide need-to-know information, not nice-to-know. People haven't got 3 or 4 hours to absorb stuff just because it's there. You want to give them information that's going to help them do their job better. So, we trim it down because people are busy.
Need to know versus nice to know. It seems like death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's so many elements to this compliance requirements that it just adds up. And meanwhile, the staff are having to service all these needs rather than looking after the residents.
Yep. And it's not dissimilar, to loop back to an earlier question you asked me about the experience I had in the corporate world and financial services and aged care. You talked, I think, Adam, about compliance. And yes, both sectors, both financial services and aged care, are heavily regulated. And there's a whole industry, certainly in financial services, there's a whole industry around compliance. Like, there are teams of people whose only job it is to ensure compliance. And, if you sit in board meetings and you sit in executive management meetings, you spend a lot of time talking about compliance issues. And they're probably no different with aged care, no different. The trouble is with financial services, dare I say it, there's a lot more money involved. It's a lot. The revenue streams that financial service providers like banks make is much greater than the aged care providers. So they can afford to invest in teams of compliance experts. In aged care, less so.
Yeah, that's whenever I talk to a friend or any friend who's working in IT, building software in financial services, that's where the competition starts and ends, is because the money they charge and make is just, it would run us forever.
Yep.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And there's a lot of merit in keeping your overheads, and we certainly, we keep our overheads low. We don't need to have big, expensive offices and massive management teams. And that then means that we can provide a more cost-effective service to an industry where they aren't making lots of money like the banks do.
And the people on the ground aren't used to facts and, crunching numbers and nuts and bolts, whereas most people in finances are looking at facts and figures all the time.
Yes.
Care providers are more practical people.
That's true. The thing is, though, in any business, whether you are a bank or whether you are a aged care provider or software developer, you need to run an operation that's financially sustainable. So, yes, staff in aged care providers or aged care facilities are generally more caring. They focus on the resident, as they should be, as are management as well. But there's definitely a financial imperative. Unfortunately, that's this reality of the society we live in, and the capitalist economy that we operate in, where you need to have a return to be able to continue to provide the best care to your residents and employ people. So you can't ignore the numbers, unfortunately. There is a need to try and be operationally effective, cut out wastage. You want to make sure that your staff are well trained, because it is a very high touch, if you like, personalized business. Yes, technology is important, but hands-on care is super important. So you want your staff to be in a position where they can deliver that care effectively. You want them to know what the risks are so that they don't injure themselves and others. So all of those factors are really important when you're running an aged care provider. You want to make sure that you're increasing your occupancy, which means therefore that in time you've got to make sure you have a correct star rating, because that's going to impact the interest that residents or prospective residents will have in coming to your facility. So all of these factors need to be taken into account when you're running a business. You're running a business. It's a business in the care industry, but it's still a business, and you will need to consider how you should be financially sustainable.
That's a very interesting point, Jurgen, because I think that's something that's not really, it's not seen that way, because I think it's 80 to 90% of the funding comes from the government. So generally our providers in the industries is a government funded industry. So not really seen as business from a lot of aspects. I know for sure there's people who do see it that way, but do you think there's a balance to that? Because I think, as you put nicely, we've got the capitalist approach, but then we've got government funding. I know there's been talks out there about making people contribute more to their own care, but do you think there's a balance that we could reach there, or what do you think the future might hold in terms of?
That's interesting perspective on how that could change in the future. There is a balance. There are some companies out there, that I'm talking technology companies, I'm talking drug companies, I'm talking insurance, well, maybe not insurance always, but certainly banks, where they make money hand over fist. So the returns are outsized for the investors. So the balance there is a bit skewed, in that the investors in those industries are getting outsized returns on their investment. In aged care, I'm not suggesting that providers should be focusing on making outsized returns, profits. There is that's where the balance comes in. I'm saying you've still got to make a profit. You've still got to be able to wash your face. Because if you're sustaining losses, unless you've got deep funds available to you through banks providing you credit or investors stumping up more money, unless you have that, you will go out of business. And that's to nobody's benefit. It's not to the staff's benefit, and it's certainly not to the residents' benefits. But you don't need to make outsized profits. So a lot of the not-for-profit providers, they essentially are generating a return, because they are not-for-profit, not a not-for-loss, right? And they're generating returns. They're not outsized returns, I wouldn't imagine. They're investing a lot of those returns or those profits back into improving the care that they provide. That is still within the parameters of being profitable and operating in a capitalist society, but without generating those ridiculous returns that some of the other industries generate.
Yeah, because we had, I think it was Japara, or I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it, but they went listed. They went on the stock exchange before they were bought out. So I always thought that was a interesting angle for a residential care or healthcare provider to take. I know they've been bought out since, and I don't think there's anybody else currently on the stock exchange, but that's the industry we're looking at, right? We've got not-for-profit who are investing back into what they're doing, and then we do have there's no law or rules against running a for-profit, get as much return as you can out there.
Well, I mean, the market, to a degree, yes, but the market will also dictate that. If you're trying to generate outsized profits, and you do that a number of ways. One is you can raise your prices with your residents to charge for matters of things, or two is you reduce your costs, and that might mean that you try and operate with less staff, but that's not going to work anymore because you've got care minute obligations. But you might, for example, not invest as much in nice food, for example. But it's going to come back to bite you eventually. You're going to get bad consumer experience scores. You're going to get a bad star rating. Probably going to get sanctioned by the commissioner. So that's not a sustainable business model either. There's a number of different levers you need to be considering and what it means for your business, not just today, but a year from now, 3-4 years from now. You need to consider how not investing or trying to maximize profits now could affect the long-term viability of your business. So, yes, I think it was interesting. You mentioned that provider that was listed. Quite an interesting way about going about it, because generally when you get listed, you probably know, your number one stakeholder, typically, even though they talk about their client and their customers, typically it's the shareholder. And because the shareholders can put their money in different other industries, whether it's banking or they can invest in the out of the mining sector or whatever, you would want to maximize the returns you can generate for that shareholder so that you can then continue to have a investment interest from shareholders and keep the stock price up. So getting involved in the stock market is a double-edged sword.
And then there's the other side, right, Jurgen? Whereas if we don't make it attractive for investment at all, we're not going to get premium level services and care. So it's I don't think there's an answer to it, not from my point of view.
Yes and no. I think, you made a comment earlier about the government. It's a government funded. Yes, but the government is like, it's just another source of funding. You can get funding from investors, or you can get funding from your clients. And ultimately, you need funding source from somewhere. In the aged care, a lot of that funding comes from government, but in time, with our population aging, there's going to be less of a tax base to sustain massive government funding of aged care. So there is probably going to there's going to be more of a focus in the future, I would imagine, on people paying their way, maybe more than they're doing at the moment. And it might get means-tested. I don't know how it'll evolve, but that's what I will see. But it still means, though, that as an aged care provider, as anybody who provides services to the aged care industry like we do, you have to be as efficient as possible. You want to keep your costs down as low as possible. You want to be effective in what you deliver at the lowest possible cost. Because at the end of the day, if you've got fat in the system, you're going to get found out eventually. And there's huge amount of revenue that gets generated in a particular industry, like, for example, banking, where there is a lot of fat, but there's enough revenue coming in that it can sustain that. But it's something like aged care, you don't want there to be much fat. So really, any provider worth their salt should be looking at running their operations as effectively as possible, but without compromising the care they deliver their clients.
It doesn't help when you're bogged down by compliance issues and having your time spent on
that's true
peripheral stuff, does it?
That is true. That is true. But on the other hand, the downside of not having compliance and regulatory oversight is that you get a bunch of cowboys who don't treat their residents very well. And that's not acceptable either.
They'll lose market share anyway, though, won't they?
They do, but we had the Royal Commission a few years ago, and it made pretty damning reading some of the practices out there. So yeah, I'm actually a supporter of compliance and regulatory oversight. I do think it's important. I mean, obviously, once again, there's a balance, right?
For sure.
You don't want to be overly regulated to a point where there's just people are spending their whole lives writing reports and reporting on indicators. But so yes, there is a balance. But I do think regulatory oversight definitely has a place. Yeah, there's a place in a lot of industries, and certainly aged care.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I've only had one more for you, Jurgen.
Yeah.
Just was wondering what your vision is for the future of aged care, and also for Switch and yourself. What do you see the future holding?
Look, I think we all agree that the demographic changes are that we're going to have an increased proportion of people in the population over the age of 65. So there's going to be an increased demand for aged care services. So I'd expect to see continual policy reforms, ensuring that there's a sustainability of aged care funding. We've talked about that earlier. There's probably going to be more integrated models. So there's a continuum of care from home, aging in the home, to when people move to a residential aged care facility. And there's probably going to be a greater emphasis on personalization of care going forward. Technology obviously will play a crucial role in transforming aged care. Things like telehealth, wearable devices, remote monitoring systems will enable healthcare providers to deliver more personalized and proactive care. So I see that happening. I also think medium to long term, we're going to see quite a huge shift in capabilities in robotics and artificial intelligence. And that's going to be used for a range of tasks, from monitoring people's vital signs to companionship, assisting people with, or elderly people with activities of daily living. So that's going to be quite transformative as well. In fact, I don't know how, it's very difficult to see how the technology will play out even beyond 5 years, because technology is changing so rapidly. But in terms of what we Switch need to do, I mean, I've given this a lot of thought. I think we need to embrace technology and innovation. We already do that. But the way we do that effectively is we partner with firms that provide cutting edge technology that we may not have capabilities in. So partnering is an important capability that we've developed and will continue to develop. We need to develop specialized programs that address individual needs. So their needs, preferences, and their goals. So things like, for example, cognitive rehabilitation programs, or mobility enhancements, or specified or specific falls prevention programs. And then we also lastly need to continue to invest in training for our own staff, so they stay on top of developments, they stay on top of technology, and importantly, continuing development, professional development for our client staff, so that they also are being exposed to learning techniques or learning experiences that help them apply their knowledge to their jobs. It is a rapidly changing world. We're in a world where ongoing education is critical. So our job as Switch is to probably develop that more, if you like, than some of our other services, because that's where I think it's going to make a big difference. Quality of the care is how good the quality of the staff is.
Jurgen, does the Jurgen of the future accept, or do you picture the Jurgen of the future in care with an AI robot companion? Would you accept that?
I'm a bit older than you, Adam, and I'm old school. So, would I like to have a robot as my personalized assistant? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's what we can envisage now in terms of what that would look like might be quite different to the reality. If you had a assistant that looked very much like a human and interacted very much like a human, almost had a consciousness. Now, I know this sounds a bit sci-fi, but it's not that far off reality. The way AI is developing, who knows? Maybe it is acceptable.
So if we cross that, it's the uncanny valley. That's what they call it in IT. When we've crossed the barrier of being able to tell that whether it's real or technology. So yeah, it's hard to imagine. It's a question I like to ask because I'm old school. Even though I'm younger than you, I'm old school too. I can't even imagine it. But if you couldn't tell the difference, then yeah, who knows?
If you've got an assistant that is always there for you, that can automatically monitor your vital signs, that can pick up when something's wrong with you, that can provide companionship, not just physical, but actually provide input to some of your concerns or some of you want to chat about a topic. It might not be a human, but maybe that would be, for you, that would be acceptable. And even for me, I don't know. I mean, right now I can't envisage it because I haven't seen what that could look like. But then I never envisaged when I was at university, I never envisaged that I'd have a phone in my hand that was more powerful than the mainframe in our university building. This is what's happening, in human knowledge is doubling every 2 or so years. And it's just, the pace of change is exponential. So who knows what the future could look like?
When we were talking about it before, the image that came to our minds was the maid from the Jetsons. But who knows what form it'll take in the future, because you talk about phones, like no one could see things like Chat GPT coming, which is a virtual assistant, really. So who knows what the future could hold.
I listened to a podcast the other day from Elon Musk. He was saying that artificial intelligence is doubling now every 3 months.
Whoa, that's astounding.
So that's going to accelerate, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm going probably a bit of topic here, but if you consider the fact that in the I don't know, 10 maybe 15 years time they'll have workable quantum computers, which are just like massively more powerful than any computer we currently have got. You pair a quantum computer with AI, and you're talking about a whole new level, which we can't even contemplate.
No.
So when people say now, 20 years ago, people say, what do you see the future of aged care 5 years' time? You sort of can answer that with a little bit of certainty. To go beyond 3 or 4 years now is just like, you really, it's interesting to hear what people think about the future, but I don't think anyone really knows.
I like the version where we've got time to go fishing again.
Sounds good.
Yes, there is that version. There's also a more sinister version as well, which we won't talk about.
Where the fish?
The Terminator movies.
Correct.
Well, thanks, Jurgen. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate your time and all the input you got. I learnt stuff from you for sure, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Adam, for giving me the opportunity to share our experiences